which is this incredible reporting that Reuters did, tracking the recycling of shoes, a program by SG Sport, Dow, and Decathlon and others, gathering shoes to be recycled into sports tracks, running tracks around Singapore. Reuters tracked 11 pairs of shoes and found out that they all ended up in sales shops and sales bins in Indonesia. Wow.
Look, Dow had an abject failure here. And it's not really because of ESG. It is because of greenwashing. But in a way, it's because Dow didn't do ESG on this project. ESG is about how a company operates and how it makes money, and in doing so impacts the environment, impacts society, impacts how it interacts with its stakeholders. The problem Dow had here is that this to them was just a CSR program. Sure that the chemicals that they manufacture do go into the soles of some shoes, but what happens after those shoes are used isn't part of Dow's business model. And so they come out with this great program to high praise from the Singapore government and from the business community, but they don't follow up on it because it's not important to their business. And that is why they have failed here and why they have been rightfully accused of greenwashing.
Explain where the failure is. It was one of the providers that was collecting the shoes for them, right? Part of their supply chain, if you will, on this.
No, this had nothing to do with their supply chain. Right. This is what happened to a product after it was done.
Sorry,
so it's not in their supply chain. The problem was Dow took ownership of a program to get all the credit, but they did not execute to make sure that the program lived up to its promise. That's where the failure occurred. That's why Dow owns this, even though they can say, well, it was the people we contracted out to didn't execute and live up to what our commitment was. That's why Dow failed so badly here, and why, if you are going to make these commitments in a philanthropical context, you have to treat it the same way as you treat how you operate your business every day.
Yeah, and of course, you do this at McClarty Associates. You look at ESG every day. Just playing devil's advocate here, it was an international operation. Shoes left one country, went to another country. I'm not defending it. I'm just playing devil's advocate. How difficult, realistically, is it to enforce these things, to ensure that the shoes begin at one location and end at another?
Well, I mean, Neil, it's the same thing as saying, how difficult is it to make sure that there's no forced labor in your supply chain? It's not, we're not the ones who are employing the people who we are sourcing our goods from. Therefore, we shouldn't be responsible for it. Of course you are. That is what you have to do to be a responsible company, a responsible investor, a responsible employer. And so what apparently happened here very clearly, that Dow made the promise of what it was going to do with this program, but then it took no ownership of the program. It contracted out. Okay, that's fine. But if you're going to contract something out, you have to audit it. You have to take responsibility for it. And that is, why I agree completely with this NGO called the Last Beach Cleanup. And they said that large petrochemical companies should have to report on the results of their sustainability projects with the same transparency as the profit-making parts of the business. If Dow had been auditing and following up, it would have stopped this from happening. So I'm not saying Dow intentionally knew this was going to happen. I have no idea, but I won't say that. But I will say, where was their audits in place? Where were they making sure that the compliance was going to happen? And because this was philanthropical in what they were doing, this is where you get into trouble.
Just to follow, I was just going to follow up on that if I could, Glenn. I hadn't actually heard of this particular recycling scheme until this story unfolded. There are many, many recycling schemes in Singapore. So to your point, I don't think they would have done it intentionally, for the simple reason this has clearly done much more harm than any corporate good they were hoping to achieve.
And that's and having an ESG mindset prevents this from ever happening. So if you had approached this from a business perspective, you would have said, okay, we are going to set up a program that is going to make a commitment that we are going to set up all of these recycling bins. We're going to collect tens, if not hundreds of thousands of shoes. And then we're going to use those for sports facilities. And we're going to partner with the Singapore government. People say, great idea. It can show how Dow is a responsible stakeholder, how Dow is trying to advance the circular economy by the chemicals that they have manufactured stay within the supply chain and just don't get dumped into the ocean or into landfill or wherever they go. But then you would say, okay, how are you going to execute on this after you make the announcement? And that's clearly where this fell down, because that is what didn't take place.
Just to give some a little bit of background, over 100,000 pairs of shoes were collected at bins at Decathlon stores, at some of the HDB estates, different places around town, like those big recycling bins, but they were just for these shoes.
Yep.
The shoes were then supposed to go to a facility where they were ground up into pellets, rubber pellets, and those rubber pellets were supposed to be used for sports tracks and walking tracks and things like that around Singapore. Now, a company called Yoke Impex Private Limited is a Singaporean secondhand goods exporter. They were tasked, or apparently hired by Dow, to collect the shoes from the bins. And it was apparently, according to the reporting on Reuters, at their sorting facility where sacks of these shoes were sorted, and the good shoes got sent overseas and resold, contrary to what was supposed to happen. And the rest of the shoes went and got pulped wherever they were supposed to get ground up. That is apparently what happened.
Well, we certainly know that the shoes were shipped. Some shoes were shipped illegally, because it seems to be illegal to be shipped.
It is illegal to do that.
Clothing into Indonesia, and then selling it.
Yep.
And so what? And Dow and companies like Dow need to know that environmental groups say that chemical companies make exaggerated or false claims about recycling in order to burnish their green credentials and to undermine proposed regulations to rein in the production of plastics. And so, if you are a chemical company, you are being watched at by these NGOs. You have a target on your back.
Yeah.
You had better make sure that if you are going to make this public commitment, if you are going to accept awards for
which
this
they won an
program.
award last year for this, right?
They won an award. Well, we can talk about how much the vetting was done by the judges when it came to that award, right?
I wonder if that award will be taken back. Huh? It should be rescinded.
I think that's the least of their worries.
No, but I'm just saying, as a matter of course, right?
Yeah, of course.
Right. Well, okay, we talk about that in a second, right? But this is, if you're Dow and your other chemical companies, if you are going to be making claims about how good you are in terms of recycling, you better live up to it. And that clearly did not happen here. And Dow and Sport Singapore said that they gave an apology because there was a quote unquote lapse. Well, I don't know if lapse is the right word.
Well, for them it is. Yeah.
And when I'm a judge, and I am a judge every year for ESG awards, and what I always say is, I want the numbers. I want to see exactly how much you've done in terms of recycling, what has been the exact environmental impact, how much money has this had an impact in terms of finances. And if you can't show those numbers, you should not be given any award. So we don't know what Dow put in for the award and what Sport Singapore put in for the award and how the judges looked at it. But clearly there was a breakdown either in the nomination as it was submitted, or the judges didn't do what they should have been doing.
I mean, just briefly, because I do find this area fascinating. Yes, at your level, at corporate level, boardroom level, there should be an audit. The numbers should be compiled. But whether we like it or not, in the real world, particularly in this part of the world, there is a close one eye culture to certain things. For example, when I donate my clothes and shoes to various charitable organizations, it's almost a given anecdotally that the migrant workers might take their pick first. I've heard this for years. And I've never had a problem with that because they're not being paid very much. If they want to take a few T-shirts or whatever, that's up to him. It's that, they'll take a few for themselves and then give the rest to charity. How do you overcome at ground level, at street level, if you like, that close one eye culture? Because it's very easy to say at boardroom level, right, we're going to audit, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But at that level, in the factory, How do you deal with it?
Okay, because it might have been that there was a one eye open, one eye shut.
I'm sure.
There isn't today. NGO, now it depends who you are and it depends what the project is. Look, NGOs are looking at you. The media is looking at you with both eyes open. You need to know this. You need to be able to have full transparency on what your program is, what your goals are, and did you reach them? And if you didn't, admit it. Right? Say, hey, we tried, we didn't do as much as we should have. Here's where the problem was, and here's the bottleneck in the recycling project. And next year we're going to try and do better. No one is going to go after you for saying we set a goal, we didn't quite hit it, we're going to try harder. Here's how we're going to try and do that. Right. It's when you don't report on anything, and now you've got reporters putting trackers in shoes and all of, they put trackers in 12 shoes, put them into these Dow bins, and none of the 12 go to where the bins say they're going to go. That's a real problem.
Great reporting, by the way.
Great reporting by Reuters. If anyone's interested to read the story, it's fascinating. We've only touched on the key elements of it, but it was a Reuters story this past week on just Google Reuters Dow recycling, and you'll find it right away.
Extraordinary piece of investigative journalism.
Beautiful reporting. That should win an award.
Absolutely.
Is that story. Anyway, okay.